Welcome from England to this international conference on security management. Today I shall be interviewing Richard Knowlton, a director of the Oxford Cyber Academy and chairman of Richard Knowlton Associates, that offers international consultancy on cyber security. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you, John, and good morning to everybody.
Good. Question that is often asked is, who in an organization should be responsible for cyber security?
Well, it's a deceptively simple question, of course, John, and it requires a little bit of a longer answer. I think the simple answer to that is that everybody in the organization has responsibility for cybersecurity, but we need to break down that general statement into some individual segments. So the first segment in that, of course, should be that the board, the top level of the company, has an overriding responsibility for cybersecurity, because tone always comes from the top. And if the people at the top of the organization are really engaged in cybersecurity, recognize its importance, and transmit that to the rest of the company, then it's possible to get things done in cybersecurity. If the top of the company is not interested in cybersecurity, doesn't regard it as a priority, then frankly, nobody else is going to either. So first of all, the top of the company, whether it's the board or the executive committee, the senior executives, they've all be people who are as enthusiastic about cybersecurity and making it work in the company as they are about the bottom line and the other more practical business aspects of it. Moving from that, hopefully your company has a top management that's really engaged, sees the importance of cybersecurity. That then transmitted to all the employees of the company. And it sounds as if it should be simple. If the top encourages everybody to do something, then it will automatically happen. Sadly, the world does not work like that. And I think very often professionals don't help themselves by the way in which they present security to the company. I speak to this as somebody who's been a security director in a couple of multinational companies in financial services and in comms. And it's very easy for security people simply to be explaining everything in strict black and white terms. This is what you must do, this is what you mustn't do. And fortunately, human beings are human beings, and they don't always respond to being told to do something that is perfectly logical. They will have their own way of doing it. Very often, because security people are trying to impose something that actually goes against the grain of the way in which they're actually running their job. So modern security practice, I think, is working much more in two directions. First of all, the importance of having a strong security culture. I've mentioned this. This is coming from the top. The fact that security really matters is part of the DNA of the organization or company. And the second thing, security trying to work with the grain of the worker rather than imposing things that block, take up time, and that are just a nuisance as far as the ordinary employee is concerned. So it's very important, I think, that the security people actually sit down with the various business lines in the organization, whatever it may be, and actually work out how the employee's day works out, what his priorities or her priorities are in the workplace, and then try and develop security practices that fit in with that, as I said before, rather than trying to impose on the top. I think the third element in all of this, which is often forgotten, but is really important, is that when we talk about your people in the company, your people will also include people in the supply chain, for example, and others who may have access to the systems in your company. So working with your suppliers to make sure that their security practices are appropriate to your security risk assessment is also really important.
Thank you very much, Richard. That's very enlightening. I've certainly learned something that I wasn't aware of. There are now a great deal of tools available to address cybersecurity. In your opinion, what is the weakest link in any security system?
I don't think there's a single weakest link. If we start with the technology side, I think a common failing is that there is not adequate attention given to really understanding and assessing, first of all, what we commonly call the crown jewels in an organization. What are the key assets you're really trying to protect? In brackets, fundamental security practice says you should never try to protect everything. So isolate and highlight those parts which are really critical if you were to lose them or if you were to not to be able to access them. So once you've identified that in your risk assessment, then you have to do a very deep analysis of who has access to those key points in the system and what the vulnerabilities are. It sounds simple and it is basic security practice, but it's surprising how often people don't do that. They have a kind of broad brush approach to protecting everything without actually prioritizing what the key assets are. If you do that, ultimately, having spent a lot of time doing the analysis, you will save a lot of time and certainly a lot of money by focusing just on what really matters. And there are simple things which sound obvious, but which are often not done. In a world where ransomware is so important, for example, making sure you have good regular backups so that if access is blocked, you have an alternative method of getting to your company isn't necessarily slowed down. People in the company are often talked about as the weakest link. That always annoys me because I always think that the people in the organization, properly trained, properly integrated into security practice, should actually be the strongest link. But again, as I said in my previous answer, this is an area where you really need to work to make sure that the people are up to the level that they need to be to protect the organization.
Thank you. Security threats are changing all the time. What do you think organizations should be preparing now to meet the challenges ahead?
I think there is one ongoing challenge, which at the moment, unfortunately, is ransomware, which is getting more and more lucrative for criminals, which is why we're seeing it go on developing and being profitable for the bad guys. I think generally speaking, against all future threats, and in a minute I'll come on to talk perhaps about one specific one, the basic security principles always need to apply. I mean, starting, for example, with good intelligence, make sure that you're talking to peers in your industry or sector, make sure that you're well keyed into your government agencies responsible for cybersecurity, and that you have a good knowledge of the broad threat landscape. And then the basic discipline that I talked about before, of understanding exactly which are the critical parts of your organization that need to be protected. So many of the common basic principles of security are always going to apply, and you always need to be putting effort into them. I think we're looking at future threats which are, it's possible to see from this point, looking perhaps over the next 10 years, one thing that's increasingly interesting me is quantum computing. And I'm not a quantum physicist. I'm not trying to explain how quantum computing works. But the fact is that over the next 10, 15 years, we're going to have computers which are 1,000 or perhaps many thousands of times quicker than current computers. And one of the key threats already identified coming out of that is that these computers, in principle at least, will be capable of breaking current cryptography. Now, that's of particular importance, of course, to governments who will have sensitive information encrypted, and also to their financial services for all the obvious reasons we can imagine there. And I think a number of issues which people need to be thinking about now. The first one sounds banal, but it's really important. Some evidence that people are stealing data now for exploitation later. In other words, steal the encrypted data. You know you can't break it now, but perhaps in 10 years' time, you will be able to break it with the help of quantum computing. And it's worth stealing it and, as it were, putting it on ice. I think the second thing is, and here I'm thinking particularly of financial services, it's not just data that's encrypted, it's very often many of the processes in an organization, particularly in financial services, which are encrypted. And I think that there are many companies that are not fully aware of which elements of their data and their processes are encrypted. And because inevitably, as in any business that's been going for any number of years, there will be all sorts of old legacy systems in use, or perhaps overlain by later updates. And actually having a detailed analysis of what's encrypted and what is not, and then being ready actually to up the encryption when that becomes necessary. Sorry, that's a subject in itself, because of course quantum computing might also be developed in the sense of giving us better encryption. But then the third element in all of that is understanding what regulators are thinking about all of this. Again, particularly in financial services, the regulators will be very hot on any idea that the encryption is inadequate. So quantum computing, I think, is one really interesting and slightly scary threat.
Thank you, Richard. I'm sure the delegates to the conference will have lots of questions to ask. I suggest that the conference takes a short break to give the organiser a chance to collate the questions. Richard, thank you once again for such a thought-provoking talk, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A session.